It had been Abner who had kept the claims of the house of Saul alive for 7 years. Following his defection to David and his subsequent murder, support for the puppet king Ishbosheth just drifted away. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands were feeble and all the Israelites were troubled, is what we'd read in verse 1 of chapter 4. Two of his captains took matters into their own hands and murdered the king. We read about what followed this assassination in 2 Samuel chapter 4 and verses 9 to 11. And David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said unto them, As the Lord liveth, who hath redeemed my soul out of all adversity, when one told me, saying, Behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings. How much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed? Shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hand, and take you away from the earth? There always seems to be people who see an opportunity for personal benefit in any situation in life. You may well have seen the advertisements encouraging people who have been involved in an accident to call a certain firm of solicitors with the promise of no claim, no fee. Around these parts they're called ambulance chasers, or ambulance chancers might be a better description. It's all perfectly legal, of course, but to many people somewhat distasteful. These two brothers that we have read about, Rechab and Baanah, could see the way that things were going, and decided to remove Ishbosheth and take the evidence of his removal to David. Now, whatever the precise motivation of these men, it seems that David suspected that they had hoped for some benefit as a reward for their assistance in removing Ishbosheth. He spoke about the earlier report of Saul's death and the bearer of it, who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings, as we read in verse 10. David had no appreciation or sympathy at all for wicked men who have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed, as we read in verse 11. But I really want to draw your attention to a more wholesome part of today's reading. In his words to these two brothers, David spoke about the Lord who hath redeemed my soul out of all adversity, we read in verse 9. I think that what made a difference in David's life was that he lived in the good of the fact that it was the Lord who was always acting on his behalf. He could count on the Lord to preserve and protect him. He didn't need people to do dirty deeds or deceitful double dealing on his behalf. The Lord would preserve him by acting righteously. As David wrote later in Psalm 31 verse 5, Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord God of truth. God always acts righteously. The very end of David's reign, just as here at the start, he used exactly the same words. The Lord that hath redeemed my soul out of all distress. 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 29. The experience of life had told David that his God could be depended upon. It was just like his forefather Jacob, who at the end of his life could say, The angel which redeemed me from all evil. Genesis chapter 48 verse 16. Jacob had been a cunning man, but he had learned that his preservation was not down to his own craftiness, but the Lord's care and compassion. That, of course, is something that we should remember today. We cannot depend on ourselves, but we can depend upon our God. Let's remember the God who has redeemed us.